Okay, it turns out this is going to be just the second video. We're going to cover free will, omnipotence, and goodness here. So if you look at page 136, we'll talk about free will. Probably the easiest way to talk about free will is to first talk about the philosophy that contradicts it, and that is known as determinism. Now, determinism, if you read along bottom of page 136, says that everything we can do is totally accounted for by two causes, heredity plus environment. In short, if you know every element of my background and you know all elements of my environment, go back to Skinner in behaviorism, in psychology, this is an example of this. If you know all the contingencies of reinforcement in every way that I've been shaped by my environment, you consider my heredity as well, then in theory you can predict everything I'm going to do at any given time. Heredity and environment equals action. That's the formula on the top of page 137. The alternative philosophy of free will states that heredity and environment is less than the action. Because in the end, we still cannot fully predict what it is that's going to go on. So the formula should read as, it's that third formula. You have heredity plus environment plus free will. That equals the action. Heredity plus environment plus free will equals the human act. Heredity and environment condition our acts, but they do not determine them. I'm going to go ahead and make a TV recommendation, although I have to be careful with this because the show is littered with F-bombs. And there's some marginally inappropriate behavior going on. But it's a fascinating meditation on free will versus determinism. The show's called Devs. It's on Hulu. It stars Nick Offerman, among others. Wonderful ideas with regards to determinism, and a lot of the lead actors in there, they are deterministic. Now, the show's not finished. I just watched episode 7 last night. There's a scene in there, though, which would clearly illustrate for you. They're claiming that everything is determined. There's a scene in there where you will see clearly that things are not. Free will is an actual thing. The people in this show don't act like it is, but it becomes quite evident that if determinism is true, then the way things work in the show should work out that way, but you can watch it and go, that ain't possible. I can even perhaps show you the scene maybe a little later on. Okay, so that's the typical form of determinism, but there's a second form of determinism known as Calvinist determinism. Calvinism is technically a form of Protestant Christianity. It was founded by German, Swiss, can't remember, Protestant theologian by the name of John Calvin. And he had a lot of odd, interesting, unusual ideas. I'm not going to go into them in detail here, but one of the interesting things is that he said people are born from that point. The minute they're born, they are either going to hell or they're going to heaven, and there's no escaping it. And here's what he bases his notion on. His notion is that because God is present in all places, at all times, remember he's omnipresent? So he's simultaneously present now, he's in my now, my present, your present right now. He's also simultaneously present in your past history, and he's simultaneously present in your future. He knows exactly what we're going to do. Okay? And technically this is correct. Okay? He knows. He can go into the future, and he knows what we're going to end up choosing. So Calvin took this as meaning we have no choice in the matter. Because God knows, it's done. It's predetermined. There's nothing we can do about it. We're either going to heaven or hell, and there's nothing we do now that will change it because it's already been established because God is present in the future. But here's the problem. And it's a fascinating concept, and a lot of people like to try and buy into it, but there's a problem. It is true that God stands outside of space, time, and matter. And so he's also he can potentially be present in any given time, in any given place. Okay? And in theory, because he's omnipresent, he can be in all places. But we aren't. We are constrained by time. And so as a result, in any given instance, we always have the capacity to choose. The free will is still there. Calvin was wrong. Okay, despite the fact that God knows what we're going to do, that doesn't alter the fact that at any given moment, we still have the capacity to choose. We have free will. Now, Debs will sit there and talk about how free will is an illusion. In fact, don't watch Debs. I'm going to show you simply that snippet that shows that the notion of determinism is wrong. Okay, so page 138. We're going to end free will with this, and then we'll get into omnipotence and goodness, and we'll wrap it up. The next question is, why did God give us free will and allow us to misuse it? Well, no, the question is misleading. You give polish to a table or a pony to a schoolboy, but you don't give three sides to a triangle or free will to a human being. Okay, free will is part of our essence. That's part of what we are. Why did God give us free will then? That's possibly the next question. Why did God give us the free will if he knew we're going to misuse it? Your parents, and I think I've talked about this in class before, what do they prefer? Do they prefer that you follow out of obedience or that you follow out of a desire? And you guys typically responded that they would prefer that you would follow out of desire. Now, if God wants us to choose, but if we have the right to choose him, we also have to have the right to reject him. The alternative is that God's creating a bunch of mindless robots. Okay, they're all programmed to follow God. Well, that's fine. But if we're all programmed to follow God, what's the valor in that? What's the value in that? If God simply creates a bunch of beings and he knows going to follow him, big deal. Okay? You might as well be creating a plant. At least as far as having any actual will, there's really no difference. God created creatures in us that he wanted to say, here, you have the option. Okay? You have the choice. You may choose to be with me. You may not. I dearly wish, and I will do everything in my power to convince you to follow me, but I'm not going to force you, because the minute I force you, you no longer have free will. And then, if there is no choice, then again, what's the value? What's the point? So that's pretty much it for free will. Omnipotence, straight up, is God is all-powerful. And then the question always gets asked, well, if all things are possible with God, why didn't God create a world without sin? And the answer is, he did. What happened to it? We screwed it up. We're the ones who turned it into a sinful place where consequently there ends up being suffering. And again, you can simply say, well, again, and we keep getting back to this notion of why didn't God not give us free will? Again, you're going to end up creating robots. There's this great story by Larry Niven about a character created called the Warlock. It's like he lived like 10,000 years ago, like in the age of Conan the Barbarian. And the Warlock he was really good at his capacities. He could, do any spell you pretty much wanted. And a guy goes to visit him, because Warlock kind of likes to live by himself. Guy goes up to visit him and finds that Warlock is living by himself. And the guy asks, well, aren't you kind of lonely? And the Warlock goes, well, yeah. But it's not so bad. Living by yourself sometimes has its advantages. And he goes, well, couldn't you, convince people? Couldn't you put a spell on people to force them to follow you? Couldn't you put a spell on women to fall in love with you? And the Warlock goes, sure, yeah, I could do that. I could make these spells where people would be forced to follow me, people would be forced to fall in love with me. The problem is, those spells create a concomitant side effect of having your intelligence drop by about 80 points. And who wants to be surrounded by friendly morons? It gets old in a hurry. That's a line I've never forgotten. So, God, in a sense, it's a terrible, you got to be careful with this sort of parallel, but God is not like he's like the Warlock in that sense of, I don't want to force people. I want people, again, to freely choose me. And so he has to create this world where people, again, create it without sin. I've set it up for you. Try not to screw it up. And yeah, we screw it up. But yet at the same time, God very much welcomes those that continue to choose us. Now, before anyone says, well, then why even create humans in the first place? Try this. Why do people want children? You take a married couple who's in their 30s and they're unable to have children, what do they often want? They often want children. And why do they want children? Because children are going to disobey you. Children, they're going to mess their pants. They're going to lie to you. They're going to try and sneak cookies. They are going to try and get away with whatever they can. And yet parents can't wait to have them. These little creatures, loaded with free will, who sometimes do what the parents want, but often don't. And yet parents want these things. God's kind of the same way with us. I know that's a little bit, perhaps you guys, I mean, being in your late teens, you don't fully understand that, but parents do want children, despite the fact that they know they're going to disobey. They know they're going to disobey. All right, finally, that's it for Omnipotence. Read it carefully. If you have questions, bring it up on Wednesday. With regards to goodness, page 139. Here's the key point to this. This is simple. Goodness is not kindness. Okay, when you talk about being all good, you're not talking about being all kind. Kindness is, oh, I'm going to prevent any suffering. Okay, goodness is you are working for the best of the person that you are working with. I'll give you an example. My son Eric was always getting himself in trouble. I mean, literally, not specifically disobeying me and his mother. He would do these goofy things that would harm himself. Like he tried to balance on top of a basketball once. He balances, naturally he falls off. He puts his arm out and he snaps his two forearm bones. Literally, it was, this thing was hanging. It was totally gross. Okay? Or another time, I shouldn't be laughing at this. Another time, he somehow stepped on a toothpick. It was one of the long ones. And he stepped on the toothpick into his heel, and it went in, I kid you not. Okay, toothpick about that long, that much of it went deep into his heel. He comes limping over to me, and I see this toothpick hanging out of his heel. He goes, "Dad, what do I do?" And before I gave him a chance to think about it, I grabbed it and pulled it out. And did it hurt on its way out? You bet it did. But if I'm kind, it's like, "Oh, honey, we'll just wrap that up because I don't want to cause you any additional pain." Well, I didn't want to cause him pain, but can I leave a toothpick in there? No. You come to your mom with a cut when you're small, okay? And she doesn't have that triple antibiotic ointment, but she's got rubbing alcohol. What does she do with the rubbing alcohol? She puts it in the cut. That's going to hurt. She knows it's going to hurt, but she does it anyway. Why does she do it? Because she's trying to prevent infection. She knows there's going to be some pain that comes about as the result of this. Kindness is making sure you never suffer. Goodness is doing what is in your best interest. You have a psych paper that's due for me in about 3 weeks. I know some of you are panicking about this. If I were kind, I'd simply say, "Oh, the paper's canceled. Don't worry about it. I don't want to cause you any discomfort." Unfortunately for you, I try to treat you with goodness, not kindness. And I'm going to say, yeah, you have to go through the discomfort of actually writing this thing because you need to get accustomed to good writing if you're going off to college, which is what you're prepared to do. Your parents send you to school despite the fact that they know that it interferes with your sleep schedule, that it gives you a whole bunch of homework, that it adds to your stress. Do they really want to stress you out? Not specifically. Do they want to toughen you up? You bet they do. So when we're talking about goodness, don't mistake it for kindness. That's the key component of this. Kindness is, oh, you're not going to suffer any discomfort. That's not what goodness is about. Goodness sometimes means also telling the truth. And telling the truth sometimes can be painful. It can be hard for someone to hear. It might mean you have to pull the toothpick out of that heel. It might be that you have to pour rubbing alcohol onto the cut to prevent future infection. Okay? Arguably, we're going through some elements of goodness now. We all have to shelter in place. Why? So that we don't get so many people sick that the healthcare system gets overwhelmed and consequently a lot more people literally die from this virus than otherwise might. Okay, so that's it for those three concepts. We will go over them again on Wednesday. If you have any questions, bring them up then. Take it easy.